Who am I? I'm Keith Marshall. I started the Anthony Powell web pages almost 30 years ago now, shortly followed by an email discussion list. That was in the sort of mid-90s. Following Powell's death in March 2000, I was one of the 6 people who started the society. You almost say the rest is history. I was secretary and a trustee for 18 years, and I'm still doing, and conference organising, of course, aided and abetted by various people, some of whom are on this call. I still look after memberships and the shop and the website, although I really should retire completely. Okay, so Anthony Powell's Residences. What I'm going to give you is a very quick gallop through all the places that I've managed to nail down that AP lived. There's a lot of it. This started off actually as a tour I did to take photographs of all the places AP lived in London and a few bits and pieces as well around London. That was in August 2008, and I presented that at the 2009 conference in Washington, DC. I'm going to share my screen. I want that one. Okay. Hopefully everybody's got that. I'm not seeing pictures of people, so wait a minute. Can I get some pictures? I can get some pictures. That's fine. That's good. Hold on. I'm just trying to get a view of some of you down the right-hand side of my screen so I can see if anybody's waving frantically or whatever. Okay, has everybody got the screen share? Yeah, a few nods, good. Okay. A photographic timeline, right. I'm going to start you off with a map. I'm not going to dwell on it. This is a map of central London. Anyone who wants to pick it up and go around and look at these places, there's your map. I'm not going to come back to it. There's a lot that isn't in London as well. And I've divided this up into little sections. So the early years, I've called it. Anthony Powell introduces himself in Infants of the Spring by saying, I was born in London, 21st of December 1905, the winter solstice, the hour towards 1 o'clock of a Thursday afternoon, the place 44 Ashley Gardens, Westminster, a furnished flat rented for the occasion in one of several red brick blocks in that rather depressing area between Victoria Street and the Vauxhall Bridge Road. Expected to survive at most 2 days, a christening took place without delay in the flat. Later, a more formal ceremony was held over the way at St Andrew's, a Gilbert Scott church destroyed in the Blitz. Well, I'm not sure I agree with Powell about the depressing area between Victoria Street and Vauxhall Bridge Road. And I'm not going to say anything about St Andrew's. That's a topic for another day. Ashley Gardens is actually a complex of mansion blocks over several streets. This is the one that contains 44. It's actually in Ambrosden Avenue, and 44, can I put a pointer on? I don't know, hopefully you can see my cursor. 44 is the basement flat here just behind this silver car. and notice the on-archivist standing there in the yellow jacket taking photographs as well. Newsletter 61 actually contains a posthumous article by Julian Allison about Ashley Gardens. They're spacious apartments with, as you would expect from late Victorian times, accommodation for servants and so on. Here's the entrance to the section that contains 44, typically impressive late Victorian architecture for the new model of living in apartments. Amherstone Avenue runs down one side of Westminster Cathedral. Note the Roman Catholic Cathedral, not Westminster Abbey. So the flats in Ashley, that block of flats in Ashley Gardens looks out over the side of the cathedral. Building the cathedral started in 1895, a few years after Ashley Gardens was started. Nominally, the cathedral was completed in 1903, although it is still not complete after the traditional style of English cathedrals. And 44 almost precisely looks out over the entrance to the choir school. So there's the cathedral with, on the right, the west front. Both the cathedral and Ashley Gardens are built on the site of the old Tothill Fields Penitentiary, which was decommissioned in the 1880s, maybe a little bit earlier, and the site sold off basically. That's where AP started life. When he was about 2, they spent a winter in Devon, obviously following his father's army posting. I mean, and we'll see that AP, as in an army family, we know, spent lots of time here, there, all sorts of places, as he, following his father's postings, and indeed his own postings when he was in the army. The notes in blue on the slides are places I haven't got images or anything much information for, so they're there for the record. Once they left Devon, they came back to London, and AP talks about they lived for a while in the Kensington Gore Hotel. This was while they were waiting to move into their next apartment in Albert Hall Mansions. Now, I've not been able to tie down the Kensington Gore Hotel. I can find nothing substantive to say who or what it is, where it is, but it might be that it is this building on the right, the white one, which is now called the Gore Kensington, and it's in Queen Anne Gate, which is just round the corner from the Royal Albert Hall. More than that, I have not been able to discern. They moved then into Albert Hall Mansions. Like Ashley Gardens, Albert Hall Mansions is several mansion blocks over. It's several blocks sort of spread over a couple of cul-de-sacs, basically, to the east of the Royal Albert Hall. And you can see in the images here, the Albert Hall poking its nose up on the right of the images. They lived in number 25, which is in this centre block of these, looking out over Kensington Gore, which is the road you can see, and looking out over Kensington Gardens and towards the Albert Memorial, which is basically right opposite the Albert Hall. These are, again, spacious apartments. They were built around 1877 by Richard Norman Shaw, who's responsible for quite a lot of bits of, very nice architecture in London, particularly I'd note Bedford Park in Chiswick. And notice too his characteristic gables. The entrance is actually round the back in a cul-de-sac. It's these doorways. I can't remember which one is actually 25. I suspect it's one of those two. You can just see the Albert Hall poking onto the left of the image, and in fact on the end wall here there is a blue plaque to Sir Malcolm Sargent, the conductor, who also lived in Albert Hall Mansions at one point. As I say, they're almost opposite the Albert Memorial, and AP writes in Infants about looking out from their apartment at the Albert Memorial. Now, it was opened in 1872, so a little bit before Albert Hall Mansions were built, opened by Queen Victoria. But by AP's day, 40 years later, it would have been considerably grimier already than shown in this photograph, which I took, about 10, 15 years ago after it had been restored. And AP also writes in Infants about, going to Kensington Gardens with his nurse, and there are one or two photographs of that. Hang on, why is that not going? Thank you. As I say, Albert Hall Mansions they're spacious apartments, mostly over 2 floors, and you'll notice, and you may have noticed in the previous sides, that the floor levels don't tie up front and back. That's because the second floor of most of the apartments is a mezzanine. Now, I've found trying to work this out quite confusing, but mezzanines are there quite definitely. The end sort of section is a section through here, and given that we've got that chamfer, it's the end apartment nearest the Albert Hall, so it's this one. But they're all much the same, and those plans are taken from a rather interesting book by Sidney Perks called Residential Flats: The Rise of Mansion Blocks, Tenements and Other City Dwellings. And this was all part of this fashion for beginning to live in apartments rather than houses. There, the Powells stayed for a few years. He's recorded there on the 1911 census with his parents and a chef and a servant, a parlour maid and his nurse, who obviously all lived in, because they're on the census, or at least were there on census night. As I say, these are spacious apartments. I think that if you count them up, that's 8 bedrooms. So they're substantial apartments. In 1913, a year or so before the First War, Philip Powell, AP's father, was obviously posted down to Hampshire, to army bases down there, and they lived in Stonedean, which is this bungalow just outside Borden in Hampshire. It is a pretty good, and I think probably fairly close model for Stonehurst in the kindly ones. AP has one or two poor quality images in infants, and this one, which is from Infants of the Spring, is the only image I've been able to find of Stone Dean. It was built about 1890 and survived until the 1980s, when it was the area was flattened, and it's been replaced by an upmarket development of detached houses called Stone Dean Close. Where once the First War started, Philip Powell was posted off to France, and quite where AP and his mother lived in any detail during the First War is a mystery, basically. In typical army fashion, there are mentions of short stays in places like Wensleydale, Codford, Cambridge, and so on. What AP does record is that at some point he attended Mr. Gibbs' day school, which at that point was at 134 Sloane Street, and this is the south end of Sloane Street on the sort of western side, down not far from Sloane Square. And the modern picture there is my image of showing roughly where the school would have been. You see, that's 132, so presumably one of these is 134. I can't find any images of it. In fact, I can find very little substantive information about Mr. Gibbs' day school. It seemed to have survived from the sort of 1890s, 1900 through to the Second War. A number of well-known people are recorded as having attended there at various points. Peter Ustinov is one. President Kennedy as a child and his brother, I think, were there for a year or few, and I can't find out very much more than that. The photograph of Sloane Street at the top is the wrong end of Sloane Street. It's the north end up near Harvey Nicks, but it gives you a flavour of perhaps what the area was like in those days. One other place we do know AP stayed for a while during the First War is Glendower Place in South Kensington. If anybody's worried about the perspective in this image, don't be. It's because I've created a joined image, and in fact the railings down the centre are actually also the railings down the right. But it gives you an idea of I mean, I quite like these crazy perspective photographs, but it gives you an idea of the place. Now, we don't know where in Glendower Place AP stayed. He and his mother, he records, lived in a boarding house. That's all he says. And that's about all we know about where they actually lived during World War One. I mean, when we were at the Chantry in September 2001 for the unveiling of the memorial plaque to AP in Chantry Church, I actually asked Lady Violet, whether any more was known about where he lived during the First War. And she said, basically, no. I mean, she said, I doubt he would himself have remembered, most of them. So really all we know is what's in Infants of the Spring. What we also do know is that in 1916, AP was packed off to the new Beacon School, prep school in Sevenoaks, just outside Sevenoaks in Kent. That's a 1913 image of New Beacon School. It's still there, and it appears that it looks, apart from being extended, it looks pretty much as it does in this image. Apart from meeting his lifelong friend Henry York, alias Henry Green, there, it seems to have been a distinctly unhappy time for AP, partly, at least partly, and probably in large part due to the sort of rigors of you know, the latter parts of World War One. He talks about kids having to dig potatoes and things, which can't have been a lot of fun, especially not for sort of 10, 12-year-olds. So he was there then from summer of 1916 until Easter 1919, by which point he was, 13. Then, I should say that while he was there, his parents took a lease on one Melina Place, or Melina Place, in London. Again, this is due to Philip Powell's posting. He'd been wounded in France. He'd been and repatriated, and was given a home posting. How and why they came by Melina Place, I don't know. But this is number one, Melina Place. The image in the bottom right is from Infants. It's AP's image of the house, and top left is my image from a few years ago. These are prestigious houses. They're, you know, this is a cul-de-sac of I don't know, 20 maybe, you know, prestigious houses. Go there, look at it by all means, but you won't see anything, because as you can see here in my photograph, they are all behind sort of 8-foot walls, and you can see nothing. I mean, you can see I've had to take this from the other side of the street. It is, however, quite convenient for Lord's Cricket Ground, you know, in one direction, and the now famous Beatles Abbey Road zebra crossing in the other. It's actually within 2 or 3 minutes walk of both. Nice area, very nice. Looks as if they're very nice houses. Don't know any much more about them than that. How are we doing for time? Okay, good. Easter 1919 sees AP at Eton. There's the iconic view of Eton, of Lupton's Tower and School Yard, which I'm sure most of you recognise. AP was assigned to Goodhart's house, which is this one. It's out on the Eton-Wick Road. Again, it's still there. I don't know the date or provenance of this image. It's now Walpole House. Originally, when Eton houses were named after their housemaster, and that was changed a while back, and then they now all carry permanent names, and what was in AP's day Goodhart's is now Walpole House. AP liked Eton. He found it congenial. It became a home from home. And I remember Lady Violet, you know, in the conversation I mentioned earlier, saying effectively, it was for him a home from home, and basically a refuge from his father's peripatetic army lifestyle. And it was here that he met many of his long-standing friends and acquaintances. I mentioned Cyril Connolly, Brian Howard, Hubert Duggan, Robert Byron, Harold Acton. They're the ones that have come to mind. I'm sure there are others. George Orwell, i.e. Eric Blair, as he was there at the same time as Powell. He was a couple of years older. Powell records they never met at Eton. And I think AP knew who Blair was, but they never actually met. And they didn't, in fact, meet until some point in World War II, when they became, of course, great friends. So Eton, he's there for the usual sort of 4 years or so, through to July 1923. In the meantime, his parents, again, obviously following Philip Powell's army postings, lived at first, I think it's number 16 and then number 35, the Close in Salisbury. Again, very nice, very prestigious housing. I remember by this time in 1922, Philip Powell was, I think, probably a colonel. He was certainly a lieutenant colonel. And this was, as I expressed it to our departed member Peter Taylor many years ago, this was in the days when colonels were somebody to be reckoned with. So yeah, prestigious housing. I hope I've identified the buildings correctly. I have to say I found the numbering and the layout of the Close extremely confusing. Even Google Maps doesn't know where it's going with it, to be honest. But here's an aerial view of Salisbury Cathedral and the Close, and the Close runs on the west at the bottom, north and east of the cathedral. 16 and 35 are somewhere here. Again, I've not managed to tie it down. I think 16 might be that corner, but I'm not certain, or it might be that corner. It's along here somewhere. I mean, somebody like John Blackstone, who I think is with us, has probably been there. In fact, I know has been there a lot more recently than I have and may have worked it out. So I'll defer to John in the discussion afterwards if he knows, or anybody else who knows, come to that. What's interesting, though, is that British Prime Minister Edward Heath lived in Arundels, which is one of from the mid-1980s until his death in 2006. And Arundels is one of the houses immediately opposite the west end of the cathedral. I don't know whether it's that one or that one. Again, others here may know exactly. I've not been able to work that out. But yeah, very nice. I mean, AP, obviously about this time, does also, and this would have been while he was at Oxford, talk about Maurice Bowra picking him up from some, I think, hotel somewhere that they were staying in the sort of outskirts of, somewhere in the wilds of Wiltshire, again following one of his father's army postings. He doesn't actually, I think, say precisely where that was. So in October 1923, when he's left Eton, Powell goes to Balliol College, Oxford. And here's Balliol, my photograph in the bottom right, and an old postcard I found top left, which is actually an image from a few years before AP was there. AP found Oxford dreary, although, like many of us in their student days, he made a number of lifelong friends, and I'll just sort of mention Evelyn Watt and Osbert Lancaster, but also he got to know people like John Betjeman. During Oxford vacations, AP seems to have spent pretty much all of the time, I think, abroad, apart from that one I mentioned where he was picked up by Bauer. There were certainly 2 trips to Helsingfors in Finland, now Helsinki, which Jonathan Black talked about in some detail at the 2013 conference in Eton. But he seems to have spent 2 summers touring Europe, and there was at least 1 trip to Paris that he records. So yeah, I mean, he spent a fair amount of time, obviously, abroad. In his 3rd year at Oxford, he shared rooms at number 4 King Edward Street with Henry Yorke, who was then in his 2nd year. King Edward Street is just off Oxford High Street, which you can see here. Number 4 is the Blue Door. They shared those rooms. It's about a 5-minute walk from Balliol. Quite handy for Oriel and Merton and Brasenose, as I say, a little bit further from Balliol. What was interesting to me when I got there and I photographed it a few years ago was 2 doors along on number 6. There is this rather splendid, I mean, I don't personally like it, but I can see that it's splendid, memorial to Cecil Rhodes. It's a bit of a bit naughty, really, because Rhodes apparently lived at number 6 for about 1 term, and that's all. But this was bronze memorial was erected by or commissioned by Sir Alfred Mosley, who was a friend and business associate of Rhodes, sculpted by Onslow Whiting. The memorial itself is Grade 2 listed, which is interesting. And as I say, it's cast in bronze. And it's quite an imposing thing. And not what you would expect to find in what I will call a back street of Oxford. So that's Oxford. We've got AP now to being about 21. So 1926, when he comes down from Oxford with a 3rd-class degree, only a 3rd-class degree in history. No shame in a 3rd-class degree, chaps, I tell you. He gets a job, I suspect, almost certainly through his father's influence, at Duckworth's, the publishers in Henrietta Street. One of the directors of Duckworth's was Tom Balston, who was a friend of Philip Powell's. So, hence the influence. AP took rooms at 9 Shepherd Street, Carrington House, which we see here. The left-hand image is as it is, or as it was a few years ago, and pretty much as it was when I was last there about 3 years ago. AP describes his rooms as neither large nor luxurious. And I think that's probably going to be fairly clear from the right-hand image, which is of the house some years earlier in 1909. And that's an image, incidentally, from the London Picture Archive. They have quite a few good, really nice images of all sorts of parts of London, which you can view online and acquire. I mean, I had to pay a small fee for the right to use it. Now, AP's rooms were on the ground floor, and in fact, his windows would have been those. There's a window actually behind this lamp standard. And they looked out into Carrington Street. There's Carrington Street as it is today. AP's room windows would have been here on the right. He mentions the all-night garage, which is now an NCP car park. There was an all-night garage there. He also talks about the block of flats inhabited by the local tarts. Well, here's a block of flats. They look a bit posh to be inhabited by tarts to me, so I don't know whether AP's indulging in a little license or not. But anyway, there's the block of flats. Both he could have seen from his window and could have watched the goings on. The Black Wall here, incidentally, is the Market Tavern, where we've had a handful of pub mates over the years. Heritage England say it was built in 1746. The pub's website says 1808. Take your pick. It's certainly been a pub since at least the 19th century and is grade 2 listed. So it's a reasonable bet that AP would have had a pint or few in that pub at some point. AP left here in the spring of 1929, I believe, because that's when Carrington House was about to be flattened and redeveloped into basically the block that you see there now. He moved at that point to 33 Tavistock Square. And he took the basement flat at number 33, which you can see in the left-hand image, and it's down the far end of the terrace in the right-hand image, somewhere where that black cab is. This is on the western end of the western edge of the square. The square, incidentally, gardens in the square have got a statue of Mahatma Gandhi and a bust of Virginia Woolf. They're impressive properties. They're 4, if not 5 stories, built in the early 19th century for the Duke of Bedford. That whole area was part of the Bedford estate. And you're only, a handful of streets from the British Museum, from the north side of the British Museum. Looking down into the basement, he looks decidedly damp and dingy. And again, this is one of my photographs from 2008. And the day I did it, it was a rather wet Sunday morning. So you can see it looks rather damp and dingy, but one suspects an improvement on Carrington House. What's also interesting about the house is that it bears a London Borough of Camden brown plaque to Ali Mohammed Abbas. He came to London during World War II to study law, and with the creation of Pakistan, his flat here was used as the Pakistan embassy for some time until a proper embassy was established. He remained in England and practicing as a barrister, and he was instrumental in setting up a number of schools across England to enable Pakistanis to speak, read and write in English. I'm not clear why AP moved from here. If he says anywhere, I've missed it. But he moved in the summer of 1932 to Brunswick Square. It's not far away. 26 Brunswick Square was where he lived. It was in the western edge of the square, and you can see in the bottom image the terrace that was on the western edge. Again, they're large properties broken up into flats, and 26 was somewhere down this far end. Needless to say, it does not now exist. Those houses which were built in somewhere around 1795, 1800, were bulldozed in the 1960s to make way for the new Brunswick Centre. And again, weird perspective because that's a joined image. So number 26 no longer exists. The houses were bulldozed on the grounds that they were in poor condition, basically, and they wanted to make way for this concrete edifice. Not as I had originally thought, and I have seen suggested that because of bomb damage. Powell had a top floor flat at number 26 Brunswick Square. From summer 1932 to February 1935. So, of course, having married Lady Violet in December 1934, they spent the first couple of months of their marriage here. AP also notes that E.M. Forster lived at number 26 at the same time as he did, in fact, in the flat below him, although AP says that they never met, which I find slightly unbelievable, but there you go. So yeah, they're married. They spend their first couple of months here. Brunswick Square is actually quite nice. It's a large, and opposite here, and you can see the trees poking out the edge here, that there's a large sort of park area. Part of it is partitioned off for children, and in fact adults are only allowed in the children's area if accompanied by a child. And it's still there, and it still functions in exactly that way. If you go along the north side past the University of London School of Pharmacology, there's the Foundling Museum and the site of the old Foundling Hospital, which was set up in the about 1739, I think, by Thomas Coram. And they cared for unwanted and abandoned children, giving them basic health care and education to enable them to take their place in society. There's the Foundling Museum and this rather nice statue of Coram here outside. I think it's a rather nice statue. It's not over large, it's human scale. I think does the whole thing justice. So the Poles, having married, they wanted to move. And they moved basically not more than just round the corner. So in February 1935, they take the top floor flat at 47 Great Ormond Street. Great Ormond Street, yes, it is literally right opposite the entrance to the eponymous Children's Hospital. The house is still there. It's still divided into flats. It's in the middle of a row of fairly ordinary looking 18th century houses. There's not a lot to say about it. Say they had the top floor flat, and I think you can see that the top floor flat is got a window up there, right up at the top. Powell doesn't say a lot about it. I haven't seen anything more about it, except that the flats in those houses sell for astronomical amounts of money. In the middle of 1937, of course, the Powells go off to Beverly Hills, Hollywood. I'm not going to cover anything to do with that. Michael Barber has suggested that they took the lease on their next house, Winchester Gate, before they left for America. I've not seen that corroborated anywhere, but their next dwelling when they came back from America is Winchester Gate on the outskirts, on the eastern edge of Regent's Park. It's the sort of iconic AP dwelling that we would expect in London. Number one is the right hand of these two houses, that front door. They were built about 1825 by John Nash, as were an awful lot of most, I think, of the houses in that area, basically between Albany Street and Regent's Park. Again, very nice houses. Numbers 1 and 2, which is the left hand of these two, are both listed, as are the railings, incidentally, which is so, and they're in a conservation area, so there's not a lot you can do with them. I mean, they effectively, I think they've probably got to remain with black doors and cream walls. That's the way conservation areas tend to work. What is good is that the Society has got permission to put a plaque to AP on Winchester Gate, and I think there. I don't know whether Paul has joined us, but if
I have, Keith. Yeah.
Okay,
no,
hello, Paul.
It's not there actually.
Okay, I'll let you say something about that at the end, maybe.
Okay, fine.
But Paul and Jeff Manley have achieved in the last sort of 2-3 years what I spent 10 years failing to achieve. So well done to them. So yeah, this is, so Winchester Gate is where dance was born. I won't say it's where it was conceived, because I actually suspect that AP conceived of dance while he was in the army. Although he says he couldn't actually write, he spent a lot of time reading around and researching for his work on John Albury. But I suspect at the same time he was beginning to gestate dance. Of course, during World War II, Powell spent years in the army. Again, moving around a lot, at least initially. Very dislocated existence. He started off with the Welsh Regiment in Haverfordwest in December 39. Before the end of the year, they'd been moved to Gosford Castle in Armagh, and this is Gosford Castle. It was used by the government during World War II and for quite a few years afterwards. Eventually, it fell into disuse and began and disrepair, and was eventually sold off to be turned into luxury apartments. And this picture is from the time when it was in disrepair. Gosford Castle, of course, is the model for Castle Malloch in Valley of Bones, Soldier's Art. The Welsh Regiment were moved around Northern Ireland. They weren't sent abroad until after AP had moved from the regiment into his role in MIL, who were in the Old War Office in London, and he does mention being sent on various courses in Cambridge, Matlock, Pembroke College, Oxford, and while in MIL, working in Whitehall, he had a variety of rented flats, one of which he records as being on the King's Road in Chelsea. When he was demobbed in September 1945, they spent their 3 months demobilisation leave at Lee in North Devon. That's AP and Lady Violet. Towards the end of the war, so before he was demobilised, AP had reopened Winchester Gate, which had taken a small amount of bomb damage, but nothing serious. And clearly they moved back in there. And there they stayed until 1952. Now, by 1952, they'd got not just Tristram, who was born in 1940, but John, born in 1946. By 1952, they wanted to move out of London, and they moved to Somerset, to the Chantry. We can almost say the rest really is history, because they were hunting for somewhere and were tipped off about the Chantry. They set about renovating the house and the overgrown gardens. I mean, it is an extensive property, more than one realizes. The ground slope from the back of the house, which is here, you can see this has been taken from well below sort of house level. They slope down to a lake and a stream, and the grottos, which AP writes about. So extensive property. The house, the lodge by the gate, the stables, the parkland, the kitchen garden, and the grottos are all Grade 2 star listed. So thought to be of quite some significance. It was originally built in about 1826 by John Pinch for James Fussell, who was a local iron founder. It subsequently passed to Fussell descendants until about 1920, sometime in the 20s, and then had a variety of uses, one of which I believe was actually as a girls' school, and then was bought by the Powells in 1952. It's a nice house. Many of you will have been there, I know. Couple of shots of the interior. The left-hand image is the library, which is the heart of the house. And if we go back, it's the room behind that lovely bay window. Just off to the right, there's a large fireplace. The bay window is behind the camera. You'll see our society member Peter Kisslinger sitting comfortably in an armchair, I suspect operating the remote control on his camera. That's the heart of the house. The right-hand image is Powell's bedroom, where he also wrote. He had his typewriter on a fairly rickety coffee table off to the right of this image. Both these rooms, in fact, the whole of the house is very much as AP and Lady Violet left them. John Powell still lives there and keeps them much as they were, as much as he can. And it is here that AP died on the 28th of March 2000, and his ashes are scattered in that lake that I mentioned. And Lady Violet died a couple of, yes, not quite a couple of years later. So there endeth the Powells. Thank you. I shall unshare my screen and comments. Let's start off. Paul, would you like to say something about the plaque on Winchester Gate?
Yes, thank you, Keith. Sorry I was late. Yeah, if you could you put it back on then, Keith, so we can see
yeah, I'm sure I can. Oh, bear with me half a minute. Come on.
Yeah, so there it is. Yeah. So if you see the black front door, what the council have said is that they would prefer the plaque to be above the front door and above that kind of little lintel there to the left, underneath the left of the first window. There, yeah, exactly. There, yeah. And
okay.
And it will be a round blue plaque. Those of you who are familiar with the blue plaques in London that are done by English Heritage, it will be of that size and style, and to be fixed there. Now, actually fixing the plaque will be rather tricky, because as you can see the railings on the bottom, you can't actually go directly underneath it. You have to go up and across a bit. The other alternative location is the one you indicated, Keith, between the two windows there.
Which I have to say I would have preferred. I'm surprised the council is suggesting putting it there.
The problem with that one as well is access, because what you can't see behind that car is that there's a staircase, steps, an external staircase going down there.
Oh, right.
So it's actually even more difficult to put a plaque there than it would be on the other location. So let's see how we go. I mean, if we struggle there, then of course we can go back to the council and ask for the alternative. But that's their preference.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and well done for getting us that far. You know, as I say, you and Jeff Manley, between you, have achieved that in what, 3 years, and you know, I spent 10 years basically failing to get a plaque anywhere. So well done.
Thank you.
Right, let me unshare that again. Anybody else? Anybody else? John Blackster, if you're with us. Yes, you are. There you are. Can you add anything to the bit about Salisbury? Because I know you've been there relatively recently.
Yeah, we were aware that that AP had spent some time, but in actual fact, it didn't. An expedition to look for the exact location was not undertaken. But anybody that's here that went on that weekend, when we had coffee on the Sunday morning, that would in the close, we would have been only a few yards away from where you indicated the house was where he lived. That's all. I think that's about all I can say on that. Just, I mean, it's not to do with AP, but the house where Edward Heath lived has a long garden, and again, I could show where it was on my aerial photograph, and that goes down to the river. It's very pleasant place to actually visit. Oh, yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
pull it back. Yes, it's certainly very
Oh,
pleasant
yes,
there.
right. Okay. Right. If you're,
So you think it's probably that
yes.
one then?
Can you see a green square which is separate just to the up a bit? No,
That one.
Yeah, that right. Okay. And then if you now come towards the cathedral, and then, as you say, I think that one there would be that one there. I think would be. And can you see it goes down to the river? The garden ends at the river.
Yeah, but I think they pretty much all go down to the river. But yes.
Yeah, but his garden, and there's quite a lot of trees in it, from what I remember as well.
Yeah.
So that's very nice.
Okay,
and
thank
then
you. I
where
thought
we all
it was
met,
probably
where we all
that
met
one.
for coffee one morning was up was well pretty much where you indicated the house to be. There's a building which is just in a little bit to your right. Yeah, there. That's right. That's a sort of cafe. And that's where we had.
I think 16. 16. The close I think is along here somewhere, and 35 I thought was over here, but it's possibly one of those.
Yeah.
Because looking at 35, you look across 35 to the cathedral. So I don't know. I'd have to go and look on the ground to be certain. Yeah.
And something else from one of the later ones, looking at when he was living in Shepherd Market. I don't want to dwell on the seedy, but you said something about blocks of flats looking a little bit looking a little bit prosperous for prostitutes. But in fact, it was true. That was a very a notorious area.
Yes, it was.
For prostitution.
Yes, it was.
In fact, when the the Street Act of 1959 came in, making it illegal to solicit on the streets, and prostitutes were sort of driven indoors, and the whole call girl thing was set up. Curzon Street was actually mentioned specifically as being somewhere where you could hardly get down the streets without being accosted if you were a male.
Curzon Street is about 100 yards behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Me when I'm taking this photograph.
And there was, and quite recently, again, there was a case of brothel ownership. I think it was just off Curzon Street or somewhere in that area. So I don't know whether it's to do with the fact that there are potential wealthy clients in the neighbourhood, because, as you say, it's not in itself. It's certainly not a seedy area.
I mean, Shepherd Market, as you say, John, was fairly seedy for a long time, and it's very much come up in the world now, and is somewhat expensive. But for a long time, yes, it was quite seedy.
Well, I think it still is, but I think it's behind closed doors.
well, yes.
No, but there was a famous case about a year ago. Again, somebody suing the owners of a block of flats opposite their Mews house in that area, because that was being run not only as a disorderly house, but it actually was extremely disorderly in terms of noise, parties, drug taking, and so on and so forth. And they were suing they said the value of their house, because obviously it's fantastically expensive around that area, the value of their house, was being affected to the tune of possibly, a couple of £1 million, which they were suing the developers of this block of flats opposite their own private house.
Okay,
So
thank you, John.
I think that's enough muck raking
Okay.
now.
Ivan's got his hand up.
Keith, thank you for a
Yep.
wonderful talk. I greatly enjoyed that, and it was so much less exhausting than walking around London. I was quite tickled by the idea of Powell living in the Close in Salisbury, as of course that's one of the models possibly or probably for Anthony Trollope's Chronicles of Barchester.
Mhm.
And he really didn't like Trollope, did he? So there's an irony in that.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Alf, you're on mute.
4 quick points. The block of flats referred to as posh doesn't look particularly old, so it might have been, could it have been rebuilt after Powell left?
Sorry, what, the one in Shepherd Market?
Market, yes.
It could have been rebuilt. I would have thought from the style, it's probably late Victorian, early 20th century, but
Mm.
it might be later. I mean, that sort of
Yeah.
brick, as you see from Albert Hall Mansions and Ashley Gardens, that sort of very red brick and that general style is sort of late 19th, very early 20th century,
Yeah, well,
generally.
it's a matter of
But
fact.
yes.
There's no point arguing back unless we can look up the sources. The second point is, on the plaque argument, why not? Has nobody considered putting it at the end? Rather on the left-hand side of the door, but on the right-hand side, I thought it would fit more neatly there. Well, that's just my point of view. The third point, also about Chester Gate, is it's a big step up to Chester Gate from Tavistock Square basement, isn't it? So would that coincide with some inheritance? Would it be about the time of, fictionally, Eridge's death, and perhaps?
Remember that, Lady Violet I don't know. I'm not privy to these things, but Lady Violet must have come with a certain amount of money, which could have helped. The move, I think, I can't remember when. I think Philip Powell, somebody will correct me because I'm going from memory now. I think Philip Powell didn't die until they got to the Chantry, but
That's correct.
certainly AP acquired a certain amount of money that way.
That was later, wasn't it?
He may have got some when his mother died, which was earlier.
The fourth point I wanted to make was about the Rhodes Memorial. I mean, the plaque, the bronze thing, and the other side of King Edward Street is owned by Oriel College, and I think probably the Rhodes plaque one side is also owned by Oriel College. The other side certainly is, and of course Rhodes was at Oriel as recent controversy. I mean, that explains why it's in what you call a side street.
Well, I mean, apparently when I researched it, and I've got a feeling this may well be on the Heritage England site, which talks about the listing. He apparently did live there for only about 3 months.
But it would be one of the places where he might have lived in college, you see. So.
I mean, it was. I mean, the putting the plaque there was really a conceit on the part of Mosley, really. That's certainly the way in which what I read. The way I read what I found. Paul.
Yeah, on Alfred's point about how could they afford one Chester Gate, I've just got Faces in my time open here.
Oh, right. Thank you.
What AP says is the property market was at that moment in a stagnant condition. We acquired the lease of a small house in Regent's Park for 17 years. So actually, if you remember, I don't know if you know about London property prices, but often properties are sold, particularly Crown Estate properties, Grosvenor Estate properties, are sold on short leases, and that makes them affordable because, of course, you have to give the house up at the end of the lease.
Oh, right.
Actually,
And
Paul, that's quite
17
interesting
years
because,
would have been would have taken them to about 53, 54
Yeah.
had they chosen. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that, and from family anecdotes, when my father came back from the war in 1946, my mother and father found a house in Hasker Street, which I think would be valued at about £8 million now, and they had that on a end of lease, on his quite modest income at that stage. So I think that was a good time to grab something. Certainly better than now.
Yeah, certainly in the 30s, pretty much everything in London was depressed. So, yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay. Yes,
There's the hand up.
BJ.
Paul has not answered about the question about placing the plaque on the right-hand side of the door. I too thought that was a good solution.
Paul?
Can you put the Chestergate picture back up again?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I've got it in front of me here.
Not too far. Yep.
Yeah. What is not apparent, that is another possibility. What is not apparent from here is that if you approach Chester Gate from Regent's Park, you see that bush on the right hand side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. That's got considerably taller. Because I've got a current when I visited it, and so that would obscure the plaque from anybody walking down from Regent's Park towards the house looking for one.
And in fact, the road goes downhill towards Regent's Park as well from here. So that you would be looking up through that.
Yes, correct. So that's quite a bit taller. So that was the reason. But I agree with you. Because of the railings here, if you look at the difficulty placing it there, that is an alternative, but it won't be as visible for casual walkers coming down the street.
Which again is why I would have thought that between those ground floor windows would have been better.
Yeah, we offered.
But yes, I had not remembered that there was. In fact, you can just see there a railing handrail going down the steps.
Yeah.
And I had not remembered that was the case. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else from anybody? No? Nobody? Okay, well.
Keith, just one question.
Yeah.
If they had stayed in London, do you think they would have stayed at Chester Gate or moved somewhere else?
Well, as Paul says, if they had only a 17-year lease, unless they could have got the lease extended, the answer to that is clearly no. At that stage, it was reasonably fashionable for writers and people to move out of London. I mean, I'm thinking particularly, Evelyn Waugh.
Yeah.
I mean, others. Graham Greene lived in Brighton, didn't he? But yeah, I mean, Waugh lived not far from them in Somerset, and in fact had moved before the Powells. So yeah, it was fairly fashionable for writers to move out of London. But who knows? I mean, they could have stayed in London. There's any number of places they could have gone, but if they and I can't remember the circumstances, but if they had the money to buy somewhere like the Chantry, well, hell, why not?
No.
I mean, it's a puzzle partly to me as well, because Paul clearly spent 2-3 days a week, every week in London for quite a few years after they'd moved to the Chantry.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, it seems crazy that they had moved out but
And visiting his publishers and
you can't understand. You don't know what the all the circumstances were. Paul's going to correct me again, I'm sure.
Keith, I've just got the strangers are gone in front of me, and he says, once I should have looked on existence anywhere but in London as exile, a preference shared by Violet, who had at the same time always contemplated a country retreat. After 6 years of war, one felt differently about London as about much else. The place was at its most uncomfortable and dejected, and work was forever interrupted by the telephone. There were also a lot of stairs at Chester Gate, which meant looking after children was difficult. So that seems to be a number of things prompted.
Yeah, I mean, and yes, I mean, a number of people here will know how depressed London was even right into the 70s. And the amount of derelict bomb sites that were there. I mean, for a long time. Now, I mean, I'm thinking about areas like Paternoster Road to the north of St Paul's Cathedral, absolutely flattened in the Blitz and not really rebuilt until they built the new Paternoster Square in the mid 70s. I mean, I remember it as a derelict bomb site. So yeah. Okay, how are we doing? Any more? Anybody else? No? Nobody? All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah.